Will Atkinson is the managing director of Atlantic Books UK. And please forgive my ignorance, but is that connected with Grove Atlantic?
Yes, it is, but not currently connected. I.e. Morgan Entrican, who is the owner of and runs Grove Atlantic in the US, decided he wanted a UK version, so therefore he founded us in the year 2000. So it was him and Toby Mundy, who's my predecessor here. But at the moment, or currently, yes, we carry Morgan's name in the company, but he doesn't actually own any of it as it stands.
It's Allen and Unwin.
It's Allen and Unwin who own 80% of us. So essentially, we're a subsidiary of Allen and Unwin.
And do you sell their backlist?
Allen and Unwin
or Grove Atlantic?
For Grove Atlantic, yes, we do. Well, we sell and publish a range of Grove titles, between 12 to 15 a year. So that's been ongoing really since the word go, and that actually is an increasing part of our business right now. So Morgan's actually spending, giving us more rights, so that we're publishing and distributing more of his titles through Atlantic at the moment.
Okay. You came to Atlantic in 2014?
Late 14, yeah.
Yeah. You were offered that plum because of your spectacular work with the Independent Alliance.
I knew them. I knew Allen and Unwin, the people at Allen and Unwin, basically because Faber was distributed by Allen and Unwin in Australia. Yeah, and I was well known in the trade basically because that Independent Alliance thing, which we all founded. I kind of ran it, but it was a confluence of people and a confluence of necessity, if you like, for us to have something.
Yes, and if we could just explain that.
Sure.
It was a group of independent publishers that, instead of just going in one by one to sell their books, felt that it was a better approach to work as a team.
There's always been voluntary associations or partnerships between independent publishers. Independent publishing, they tend to be good at partnerships because we can't own everything, like a Penguin or Random. So therefore, we have to be. The quality of partnership is very important to survival. I think what the Alliance did, which hadn't been done in the past, is that it was very nailed down. There were contracts between us, and there was a sort of a commercial imperative to be in the Alliance. And yes, there were arguably some of the, well, certainly not arguably, unarguably, there was some of the elite of independent publishing were in the bag.
And you were the sales and marketing director for Faber.
Yes, and Faber directed the sales effort. It was an a la carte approach, in that not everyone did the same thing through the Alliance, because the bigger companies would want to sell some of their books themselves,
right.
And the smaller ones couldn't, and therefore. But really, it was to a certain extent about heft in the market, but really it was about access. So being able to talk to Amazon properly, supermarkets, where people wouldn't get in to see people on their own, but would be as part of a group. And it was attractive because independent publishing tends to be attractive to people, but also it was a sort of gathering of cats. But I think 2009 was kind of the big year, and at that point we became the 5th largest publishing group in Britain. So you had the big four, and then there was us. So at that point, it was.
And who did us include? Sorry, Faber, Canongate,
Profile, Quercus at that time, Atlantic, Granta came in at that point. Short books, an icon. Really hope I'm not missing one.
Portobello, were they in?
Portobello were part of. Well, they were part of Granta at that point.
Okay.
Or at one point they were part of Atlantic, but so between us, and the Quercus thing was important too. They were independent at the time, and they had Stieg Larsson going gangbusters at the time. So we came from a sort of aren't the independents lovely, to actually a must-have. So we had a series of must-have books. Two Obama books that Jamie published at Canongate was also happening at the same time. Each Shoots and Leaves had happened, but New Scientist had sold millions and millions. So it was.
So they pretty well had to deal with you.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, we had some must-haves.
Yeah,
rather than let's deal with the big four, and then maybe get some Macmillan and Simon Schuster and Bloomsbury books in, and then let's not bother about the rest. So it was that was becoming the 5th largest group was really important. It had never really been done before in that way, there was a commercial imperative to be part of that group rather than just two independent publishers kind of coming together and having a bit of a nice chat and saying, "Oh, maybe we should do this together." There was infrastructure, and there was it was a big operation, and keeping the show on the road was my job, I guess. Mm-hmm. So it was all that being the centre of it is really about faith and about trust from the other people, just to make sure that those other companies feel that they're getting enough of your time and enough of the thrust. But really, the alliance was a sort of first among equals. Yes, Faber was the biggest and therefore provided the infrastructure, but the spirit was not. Everyone contributed the spirit.
It's funny. It's I used to have a small media rep house, and it's the same idea. You go in and you talk to a key decision maker, and you put a selection of services in front of them.
Yeah.
And as long as all those services are seeing an increase in their business, then everyone's happy.
Yeah, that's spot on, because I think we founded the Alliance in 2005, and I think through that times 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, everyone grew.
Yeah.
Every single one. So it wasn't, obviously everyone has good publishing years and bad publishing years, but it was kind of right in thinking that everyone grew. Some of that was just pure coincidence, and that we had Booker Prize winners and other prize winners at the same time as Stieg Larsson, the same time as Obama, the same time as New Scientist books. But the collective was certainly, we were getting to see a lot more markets than we would have done otherwise through those years.
And you weren't tripping over each other then. There was a sort of a defined, you go after these people and we won't interfere. There was a territory for the independent alliance, was there? Or
Yes, sort of. I mean, I think one of the most useful things that a sales team can do is obviously sell your books abroad. So there was an alliance, field team in Europe. There's one in the Middle East, and people going to the Far East. So everyone had very, very slightly different arrangements, but only slightly. So we all ended up with Alan Unwin in Australia, for example, but with people having individual relationships with Alan Unwin, and then Penguin or in South Africa or in India would have maybe there'd be very slightly different arrangements, but essentially everyone kind of did the same thing.
Okay.
And then the bigger companies would sell on their own to Waterstones, let's say, or W.H. Smith Travel. It was really, if you could do things by yourself and prosper, go for it, fill your boots. But if you couldn't, then come back to the mothership. That's what I said about a la carte, and that did work for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So you increased your key responsibility, I guess, was to increase Favour sales to start with, and then the others were, if they did well, then Faber benefited from that because you got a percentage of their sales.
Yes, that's true. But also, it was I hope it was a two-way thing. Being part of a bigger thing was going to be good for Faber anyway. What we really tried to avoid was that it was Faber and then a whole bunch of third parties. Because that's a sort of death knell, because that means that you're second, third, fourth, fifth out of the bag, and often that wasn't the point.
I guess you led with the must-have book then.
Yeah, exactly. So if you had a new Stieg Larsson, that was going to be, that was going to be the biggest book out of the bag, or some Canongate, piece of event publishing, or whatever, or New Scientist, or Eat Shoots and Leaves, or Mary Beard, or whatever. So, but each salesperson would doctor accordingly. But Faber benefited in the same way as the others. And in Faber, I can't remember the numbers, but it's 1% of the market, or 1.5% of the market. Together, we were more like 5 or 6. So there was a multiplication for everyone. It just for the smaller ones who have to be bigger. Yeah, so Faber benefited in both ways, being part of the bigger thing with the access they wouldn't have had otherwise, and yes, the commission that we got from those companies. But it was about sharing. So as we grew, then therefore the commission rates fell, so that people got a better deal.
And again, you sort of leveraged whatever was hot.
Yeah, in some ways, the Independent Alliance is just two words that we put together to describe what we were doing. But it was a sort of brand. It was like a lightning conductor for the rest of the independent sector. We were very noisy, probably a bit annoying, and we were quite shouty about our success. I mean, And that comes from being smaller anyway. Is that if you're smaller, you have to look like you're punching above your weight, and we were doing that kind of all the time. So I spent a lot of time being either quoted or misquoted in all the trade all the trade mags. So we were seen as that the independent voice was always kind of at the front row of whatever was going on in the book trade. It's less necessary now, but certainly through those probably the first 5 or 6 years we did that. It was kind of constant.
But each of you have such terrific brands as well, though.
People ask me, "Oh gosh, there must be internal competition, and how do you decide, and all that kind of thing." And all our customers were thrilled that we're all in the same place. Particularly, I have to say the Europeans, because it's not easy to get to. So I didn't worry about the internal competition because we were so. Customers were so keen on having us all together, and actually the likeness, even though the companies are pretty different, but if everyone worried about them being too near each other in the publishing, you only have to go down, certainly in the old days of Charing Cross Road, there was a reason why there were 25 bookshops all in one go. It was a destination place, and it was the same thing.
Like car dealerships. Yeah.
Exactly, just on the outskirts of town, exactly. You've got the Ford next to the Toyota, and it was the same process. It was we were there, we were accessible. That's the big thing about smaller independents. It's they're not tucked away, but they're just less easy to deal with. If you're a very, very busy supermarket buyer and you're inexperienced, let's say, why you can fill up your Tesco or Sainsbury's or whatever with a call to Penguin Random House, quite frankly, and you miss out on a few Hachette goodies and a few HarperCollins goodies. So okay, you make 3 calls, and then if you're more experienced, you make 4 or 5 calls, to the other big ones. And then if you're only 1 or 2% of the market, you can easily get left out. But if you're 5 or 6% of the market, you may as well make that 5th call as well.
Yeah,
and that was that was kind of the whole point. So we all benefited from that.
Okay. So prior to that, you were in charge of marketing and sales for Faber for 10, 15 years?
Less than that. I think the marketing thing came, I think, in about 2006 or so.
Okay.
I've been at Faber for quite some time by then, up to 12 years or so. In the 20 years I was there, I had about 10 different job descriptions, which meant they thought I was brilliant, but had no idea what at.
Right.
But really, it was. I started as a sort of paperback publisher in 1994, but then moved into sort of marketing for a while, on the paperback side, and then onto paper sales and marketing, and then switched into sales. So and then a fairly traditional route up, if you like. If that's the right word. So I was UK sales director by. In about 2000, I guess, something like that.
And prior to that, you worked at Waterstones.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I worked at Waterstones in the what I would regard as the golden era. I mean, I joined not quite at the beginning, but when there were 5 stores in 1985, and it was an amazing time.
Why was it the golden era?
It was just we were opening shops all the time, and we thought we were changing the world, and we were. We were very confident in what we were doing. It was extremely expansionist. They were heady days. We were very young, most of us, with extreme responsibility. I opened a couple of shops, Cheltenham and Guildford, and I was a kid really. £1 million of stock, 12 or 13 staff, and Tim gave us a lot of responsibility very early on, and we responded in kind, quite frankly. But they were heady days. They really were. The last job I did was in Hampstead, which I didn't open. I'd been open some time, and that was certainly the golden time of events. It was really before the explosion in literary festivals, and they were Hay had only just started. Edinburgh was quite sort of sombre, and Cheltenham really the literary side was not as extensive as it is now, and that was kind of it. So the bookshops, and particularly, very much Waterstones, were the people who drove the readers' physical interaction with authors, and that was Waterstones were brilliant at that, pioneered it. There were some sort of superstars who did that within the group, but Hampstead was certainly a plum place, A, because of obviously its location, and B, because authors like going there too. There was a glamorous edge to it. But also, you were a genuine opinion former there. Lots of media lived up in Hampstead, and what was in your store, and how they talked to you, and what was hot and what was not, kind of mattered.
Mm-hmm. This is Michael Joseph from The Adventure of Publishing, 1949. The ideal preparation for the publisher. Well, let's just start a little bit prior to that. Salesmen are born and not made, but an enthusiasm for salesmanship and books should bring anyone the chance of a congenial and remunerative job in publishing. The ideal preparation is at least 6 months in a good lending library or behind the counter of a bookseller's shop. First-hand experience of the reading and buying public is invaluable. The bookseller's assistant will also gain immensely useful knowledge of the output and methods of all publishers, of seasonal sales, trade literature, book prices, jackets, and possibly of accounts and publishers' travelers as well. Of all preliminary experience, I regard bookselling as the most valuable, if only because it brings one into first-hand contact with the ultimate arbiters of the publisher's fate, the customers themselves.
Yeah.
So you got that.
I think that's probably right. I mean, I think you need some really strong basis, and bookshops are kind of the obvious place. There are, of course, other ways to learn your trade. But some kind of grounding, that's the right word. Grounding is important. My grounding went on for 9 years rather than 6 months. I have to say,
it's slow learning, right?
Slow learner, yeah. Exactly right. And I was enjoying it. I think so. The entry level jobs in publishing are actually not particularly interesting because and
they're not particularly well paid either.
And they're very badly paid. I'm not telling them not paid either, but because we publish books every month, at the lower levels of publishing, the starter levels, they're very routine. You tend to be doing the same things every month, whereas in book selling is actually you're learning. You learn the shop and you learn the titles and learn what happens. That's a much steeper learning curve. I think you have more fun, or certainly I did.
Yeah.
Publishing is probably more interesting in book selling in its entirety, because on the whole, you're dealing with a global market rather than either just your shop or just a chain or whatever. But that's just me.
Yeah.
Having done both, you need a grounding. I don't think I was ever a classic salesman. I have to say, I meet classic salespeople. They can't kind of help themselves. They just have to sell you something, whatever's going on. Whereas I was more an enthusiast, if you like, and also if you can talk to people about stuff that you're interested in, quite frankly, the selling kind of comes. Yeah, there's fairly straightforward.
Yeah, as you say, there's a huge amount to be said for enthusiasm. Yeah, really. Yeah. Let's go back 150 years or so, and look at what or how publishers, who were typically to start with booksellers.
Yeah, they're both, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, you look at Johnson's Dictionary. It's a group of booksellers that got together to put up the money to print and publish it. So they, back say in the mid 1800s, there were bookstores and there were libraries. I don't know if you're that familiar with how they actually went about selling it, but I thought I'd throw it out anyway.
Not particularly. I think I don't really know. I'm not a sort of super historian of the industry, and I don't quite know when serialization finished as well. All the Dickens and I think the early Thomas Hardy ones were also serialized. There's a lot of serialization going on, and then at the end putting them into a book.
Yes,
But to be honest, I don't know, quite frankly.
Okay.
How that kind of worked.
I just want to get to the roots because I'm going to start on a line of selling and book sales, and I know that lending libraries were really important, and then Heinemann came out with some kind of a one book instead of 3 volumes, it was 1 volume. And that sounded the death knell for the lending libraries. He made them affordable, in other words. And that would have been around the turn of the century, 1900, 1910, thereabouts. I guess the question then is, libraries were really important.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think, the libraries are all part of the certainly in the UK, part of the Victorian Enlightenment for everyone.
Everyone, the working class.
The working class and self-improvement and all that.
That's what drove the everyman library.
Yeah, all that. And certainly, if you look at the dates above, county libraries and town libraries in Britain, it'll basically all start with 18 something.
Yeah,
all of them. It was a great thrust, if you like, and they would have been sponsored by, on the whole, private subscription on the whole, but not always, and then the government slowly gets more and more and more involved.
Right.
But certainly, right up to the 80s, 1980s, libraries were providing a huge amount of support or finance for publishers.
And how would those be? Would they be sold to individual libraries in cities around the country?
Well, even now, the sort of library consortium is a kind of confetti of different things. And,
okay.
There are various attempts to get certainly the buying for libraries into sharp order. But I can only imagine it was as disorganised as it is now, quite frankly.
Okay.
So everyone will be doing their own buying, essentially. The sourcing might have been from different places, but
okay. So you didn't start out in the 1850s. I didn't suggest that because you're about the same age as I am, I think. But taking it back as far as you can, then, how did you approach, or did you approach selling libraries books?
By the time I got there were things called library suppliers. So that was Holt Jackson, Askew's, and they were those places which bought books and then put them into libraries, and they would service them first, and still do.
What does that mean?
It means either putting plastic jackets on them, putting the barcodes on them, and I went up to one of them once. I can't remember which one. I think it was Holt Jackson in Preston. There was one county library, let's say call it Worcester. Worcester County Library wanted their books serviced in one way, and Worcester City Library wanted it done in another way, which was just insane.
Right.
Insane.
Yeah.
And so, but that continues to this day. They're now amalgamated with the wholesalers, the trade wholesalers. Those were fine businesses which had been going for many, many, many years. And at that point, your rep, or nice that Michael Joseph used the word traveller, because that was the travellers were the people on the road and had huge power. And so those people have been, that way of selling had been going on for a very, very long time.
Right.
Very long time.
Yeah.
I don't quite know how long, but certainly in the 30s maybe. And I remember certainly in the Faber archive there's a note from T.S. Eliot saying the catalogue isn't good enough. It's sell. The copy's really dreary. T.S. Eliot really cared about sales. It wasn't all the wasteland
a banker. He wasn't just a banker.
No,
or a poet.
he was, but no, quite. So the catalogue was always the kind of the main thing, and for the independents, that's, to a certain extent, it's still the same. The catalogue for the season. The independents still have these physical catalogues. Almost all of us, whereas the corporates have tended to abandon them.
The library market as a percentage of all sales, I guess that shrunk quite a bit, has it?
It has, and it's also not easy now it's not easy to find out, because all the buying is done through the wholesalers. It used to be done individually when these people were independent, but now that all of them were bought by the wholesalers. All of the library suppliers.
Right.
Askew's, Holt Jackson.
Now
you just get a lump order from the wholesalers, which will include the one or two library suppliers that they own. But we don't necessarily get sight of that. But even when they were independent, the library market was quite, unless you had a big author and there was a special print run, on the whole, the money was becoming not particularly material. So I'm going back kind of 10 years now, probably. Whereas so the library market for some fiction was still important, particularly sagas and romance and all that kind of stuff. But it was already getting pretty insubstantial.
So what does that mean? Is it was 5% of your business?
Tops, yeah.
Okay.
Tops.
Okay.
And probably still is that now, but it's sort of hidden within the wholesaler kind of mechanism, if you like.
Right. So do you have salespeople that call on those wholesalers?
Yeah. Yes.
And present the books and try and tell them that this is going to be big or important,
exactly.
or.
And we happen to do it through the alliance, so we're not going to the wholesalers. The Faber people are on our behalf, but that's a technical thing. But it's and they're important customers for us. So Gardners and Bertrams are big customers of ours,
Mm-hmm.
and that includes the library sector. But they don't really make a difference in terms of a print run, or in terms of our kind of publishing. And I think some of this is about ebooks. Some of it is, in that the people who really consumed genre, go down to the library, get the 10 crime books, in the crook of the arm, go home, read book a day. Those people have a lot of them have emigrated onto E, because yes, you sort of have to pay, but you sort of don't. There are a lot of cheap ebooks out there, or you can go onto a subscription. If you're really consuming those so those people don't necessarily need to go to the library in that way they used to. So there's a correlation between library usage and ebook
Usage.
Usage,
Yeah. Okay, so what else do you do when you go to the wholesaler? What else do they cover off?
They supply the independent sector.
Booksellers.
Yes. Some independent booksellers will want to deal with a publisher direct.
Yeah.
And they might choose to see 5 or 10 or 15 or 20. But of course that's quite a large... there's a large amount of time spent buying.
Yeah.
Or they'll do that, but order through the wholesaler, so all the publishers' books will come in one box rather than 20,
right?
Or at least 5 or so.
Is there some kind of price discount if they deal with the wholesaler versus directly with the publisher?
It'll be slightly different, yeah.
Okay.
It will be. They'll get better terms from us on the whole.
Directly with the publisher,
Directly with the publisher.
Okay.
Just because you're not dealing with a middleman.
Yeah.
Essentially, the wholesalers are very competitive, and therefore they'll try to match, and in some cases they will. But also the wholesalers will be offering kind of rebates for, if you put a certain amount of money through, us, i.e. Bertrams or Gardners, then we'll give you £5,000 back at the end of the year, or 10, or whatever. So there are plenty of incentives going on there in order for them to buy from them rather than from the other wholesaler, or indeed from weirdly directly from us. So it's those libraries, the independent sector, the kind of places where books are not the main thing.
Yeah.
So therefore they've got the whole range. Again, that's one phone call, one order pad, one delivery. But if you're a stationer who happens to run a nice little run of books, or you're in a tourist town where you need to up the books in June, July, and August, you'll use a wholesaler for that. But it's not your main. These are mixed product, or multiple product, smaller stores on the whole. So there's a sort of non-trade aspect to it. And the other one, which very much is a trade aspect, is Amazon, because Amazon will try and get the books as quickly as possible. If they run out, on the whole, the wholesalers will operate a 24-hour service. So therefore, Amazon, where the customer is king.
That's why they're so damn successful.
Tough business operating methods, I have to say. But so if it means that getting that from a publisher is going to take them 3 days, and from a wholesaler is going to take them 1 day, then they may well use the wholesaler instead of going using the publisher or the publisher's distribution. And the final major plank in the wholesaler's armoury is export, and Gardner's particularly strong in export. So up to, I don't know the numbers now because they haven't shared them with us recently, but it can be done. That has increased in their business hugely, that area. And it's now 30-40% of their overall business. And maybe more. So
and again, that's British or English-speaking countries that would order from the wholesaler your books. So they would be bookstores in all sorts of English-speaking countries that want books. They'll go to the wholesaler. And
so we've done extremely well with the tie-in of Call Me by Your Name. The film was out. It didn't win a whole bunch of Oscars, but it was one of the sort of. There's a lot of shortlisting. The film was okay, successful, but the book attached to it, the book came first and then they made a film of it. We've done extremely well with that. And the reason, we've sold almost more to gardeners than anyone else, because gardeners have been piling it into the Far East. The film has been a sort of big cult there. It's a sort of gay novel and a gay film, but it's a sort of dressed up in a way which is palatable to everyone, I think.
That's the Italian movie.
Yes, it's set
I saw it.
Yes, yeah.
I was thinking, what the hell movie is that? Am I out of the loop here? And I've actually seen it.
It's one of those nice books where the book and the film are called the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Gardeners were really selling, they were absolutely going gangbusters with it, and it wasn't because the independent sector in the UK had embraced it in a major way. It's because they were selling to Thailand and Taiwan and Japan
and again, these would be just all sorts of booksellers in those countries would come to them.
Yeah.
And they would ship them out individually or whatever the order was.
Because if you're going to have British-centred books, and you've got a whole bunch of other stuff, you might have some American books and some local language stuff or whatever, then using one wholesaler's...
Makes all the difference, yeah.
How the wholesalers manage to make that work in terms of margin, I don't know, but that's...
it's not your concern.
That's not my
But they're
concern.
getting a whopping big discount off you anyway when they buy the book.
That's true.
Yeah. So there is some margin to play with.
That's true. So the wholesalers are I mean, in some ways they don't necessarily create that much demand, though they do have catalogues, but they essentially are sourcing. I mean, they do have salespeople, and they certainly have salespeople in the international territories, certainly. And again, saying buy from us rather than from publishers direct.
What do? They go around each bookstore?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And your salespeople don't do that.
They do. Yeah, they do. In some ways, we're competing with each other. The gardeners people may go around a bit more often, or it might be easier for them, or it's part of an ecosystem. Quite frankly, if you're a bookshop in Manila, let's say, you've got US editions versus UK editions. We're competing in that market, and the Manila bookshop might say, you know what, I do enough business with Penguin in order to deal with them direct, but I don't do enough business with Atlantic to deal with them direct, so all my Atlantic stuff goes through the wholesaler. So there's a question of scale.
Okay, so we've covered off the wholesalers, who cover off the libraries and the export market and the independents. Who else would you sell to? Aside the obvious ones would be like the supermarkets, and what you'd sell directly to Amazon and the chains.
Yes. In some ways the business has changed, in other ways it hasn't, probably like all businesses. After the net book agreement went in 1995, there started to be mass consolidation, both in the publishers and in the booksellers.
That's when it was sort of a free fall of pricing, because it's a competition. You could price it whatever you want after 95.
Yeah, and I think there was the expansion of the 80s, and that did continue through the 90s. What did happen with the net book agreement is that it expanded the market, but at the same time, whilst it did that, it became more competitive. So there was a sort of weird kind of gold rushy thing about it. In the olden days, which is probably now, even up to late 90s, you're looking to acquire a book, and as the salesperson, I go, I'm going to put 300 into books, etc., 500 into Borders, some into Otakers, some into Dillons, some into Waterstones, some into Hammocks, some into books, volume 1, some into Thins. There were a huge amount of chains that you kind of had a control. You knew roughly the kind of book it was, and therefore
where it would sell the best. Yeah.
But also you'd know you were going to be selling to up to 10 bookshop chains. This was, this is only 20 years ago, and now there's only one. We're taking Smiths aside. Waterstones has become that thing.
And what do you think about that?
Well, it involves a different kind of selling because it's sort of all or nothing.
Well, yeah, and if they don't like your face, well, then you'd send someone else in. I guess.
That's probably true.
But still,
and Waterstones, have turned themselves around. And I think that they're doing an excellent job, and we're very fortunate in the UK to have a 280 strong book chain in a small island of ours that cares about selling quality books, and it's been through a number of iterations reflecting its ownership. But at the moment, yes, the discounts are high. Yes, they certainly don't take enough of our books,
and they've got a monopoly. That can't be good.
Essentially a monopoly. But
well, I guess there's the option of buying it online, though.
And it's sort of become binary, sort of. But the independent sector now is doing well.
They can't offer the same discounts, though, can they?
Well, Waterstones don't really, they don't particularly want to. James Dawn, who runs Waterstones, is always, the great thing about him is he's believed in the product he's selling. And that sounds really basic, but it's really, really important.
He believes in the value of books not discounting them and treating them like a commodity.
Exactly. Of course, he has to be practical, and of course, if you yes, there are 3 for 2, paperback tables at Waterstones, but that tends to, they'll use that tactically rather than strategically. I.e., if they really feel they need to do it, then they'll do it. But on the whole, they're trying to sell books for full price, so they push back on us if we're going to put our prices up. Because they're going, well, the published book's £25 on rather than 20. They're going to go, Christ, we're going to have to sell this thing at 25 rather than 20 because that's what the price is.
Okay.
Whereas going, that's fine, we'll knock it down to 10 quid anyway. So Waterstones is a kind of interesting place. The other thing that's happened recently is that Amazon have also stopped discounting in a way that they used to. Amazon really is about market share, and I think they got to a point where they thought, actually, we're not going to get much more market share in the physical book space. Kindle's more important to them anyway. So we'll call it quits there. And so now you'll find the discounting is far, far less on Amazon than it used to be, because they've wiped out as many independents as they can. Waterstones is still standing, and therefore they've sort of called a halt, if you like. But it means that there's less of an obvious bargain to be had online. So therefore, that's allowed Waterstones to sort of consolidate, but it's also allowed the independents to give a very, very different experience. So the independent sector, which had year after year of misery through the late 90s, all of the noughties, most of this decade as well, have bounced back, basically because I think the ones who survived are very, very good. And so therefore they're very good bookshops.
Yeah, they're very good at cultivating a clientele and giving them what they want and talking to them about what's good, what's not so good, what's available. The
power of recommendation is still really important. It's not still important. It's always been important, and only got more so now that time is so precious, and certainly, particularly on the people who want to read the more literary stuff, let's say. They don't want to waste their time on a difficult book which doesn't get them anywhere. They want to read a book that is difficult and gets them, is brilliant, or is not that difficult and gets them there. So people don't want to waste their time with that, and so the power of recommendation is really, really important.
And word of mouth has always been the best seller, right?
That's true. That is true. At the moment, the ecosystem in the UK is about as healthy as I've seen it for a long, long time. Even though the numbers, and are less, the increase is less impressive than it was, but it's still, the value of our business is still going up. I'm talking really about the trade sales in the UK, and the value and the volume's going up a little bit as well. It's quite healthy at the moment.
And you think it's because of people that are hand selling the books better than they used to, or?
I think there's been a slight return to analogue, in that there was a love affair with E, and that's dropped back a bit, and therefore
leveling off it.
Yeah.
25% or?
Yeah, about that. Yeah, it depends what kind of what you publish, but certainly our turnover is about 20% or so. But on Corvus, our more commercial end, it's more like 40 or 50%. So the ecosystem in the UK at the moment is pretty good.
Just if we can focus on why you
back to the selling.
Why you've been so successful in sales and marketing. Why have you been so successful?
Never good to ask an English person that.
Okay, that's true.
We're not very good at that. But I think I stayed at Faber a long time. I was there for 21 years. So I think there's some basics around selling, and they're really basic. Half the time, it's just about turning up. You just have to.
I've heard that before. Persistent,
and you just have to be reliable. Don't be a jerk and turn up. Because you can't. The stuff that you're selling can speak for itself.
So you make sure it gets in front of the right people.
Yeah, and the trade is very structured. You have a monthly appointment, and you go in and sell your wares, and then you come back the next month. I think that the reason that I've ended up doing being the managing director and publisher of Atlantic from a sales background is that,
as opposed to editorial, which is typically where they come from.
That's true, though. I think that the salespeople who could read were always going to do quite well in this environment. My previous boss at Faber was a guy called Stephen Page. He came, he was a sales guy. He was sales and marketing director of HarperCollins, and then went on to run Faber. So those two things are kind of the same. Or someone like I know Richard Cable, who's very very senior at Random House, running the vintage and other sides of the business. Again, came from a sales environment. So if you knew the market and were commercial and had those disciplines, I wouldn't necessarily say skills, because I don't think there are any. Selling skills is just it's really about who you are.
It's about being enthusiastic, as you say.
You can say there are some selling techniques and you can learn them, but in our business, it's not really about that, because you're going back month after month, or every 2 months or every quarter or whatever,
to all these people that we've talked about.
You can't really screw them, because on a sale and return universe, which is what we have, if you really piled in with something and oversold it, so that person has used, that bookseller has used 10% of their buying budget supporting you, and you've sold them a pup, then it's going to be pretty tricky to do it again.
Well, and they can return it anyway.
Exactly, yeah. And
so that just pisses off your employer.
Yeah, and it means that they've backed that book as opposed to another book which would have done better for them. So it's you have to know when to really go for it and when not to. Otherwise, you can't. In
other words, it's your editorial judgment, how good that book is,
or how well it was. Certainly on the selling side, how well it would sell for that particular customer.
Right.
The worst salespeople are the people who try and sell everything, because they're really boring and a real pain in the ass.
At the same level.
Yeah.
Yeah, as if they are.
Everything's going to be Da Vinci Code.
Right.
So.
But that's just. Not to diverge too much here, but that's the thing that's so annoying about the whole publishing business, is that every book gets such bullshit accolades that they can't all be that good.
No.
But they all get that. And you talk about the salesman being annoying. Well, the blurbs are annoying.
They sort of have to be, because in some ways that's the only thing you've got to sell the book to the consumer. Mm-hmm. We haven't really talked about, but
well, that was my next step here.
Yeah, and I think often the jacket is the only thing that the consumer has to go on. They have to sell the book, because sometimes there'll be nothing else.
Well, there is something else, of course, and it's the content.
Yeah, but you can't read the book in the bookshop.
Well, some people try.
There are one or two, and all power to them. You're right, and the wider point is right in that publishers publish too much.
And you know what? That's the point that Jeffrey Faber made in the 20s, and Michael Joseph made in the 40s, 50s. It's exactly.
And it's still happening. It's still happening now.
Yeah, and I suppose they're all chasing a bestseller, aren't they? They're chasing the hope that one will hit it really, really big, and that'll make up for hundreds of other titles that are mediocre.
You don't always know. That's the genius of our business, and also the weakness. I mean, publishing is a fabulous mix of opposing forces, and the biggest one for me is the empirical, i.e., what's happened before. And then and the creativity, if you like. There's a reason why J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, was turned down by whatever it was, 9 or 13 publishers, because a bloke flying around on a broomstick wasn't really where children's publishing and reading was at the time. It was a very gritty, realistic, issues-based type. That's what people were reading, and that's what they wanted. So therefore, this rather whimsical private school. With all this stuff, and it just wasn't part of the market. So that's the empirical side going, we mustn't publish this.
Yeah.
And the other side going, wow, this is an amazing book, or you know what, it just might sell. And of course, the first two didn't. So the first two
Harry Potters.
First two Harry Potter didn't. So it was the third one that really.
And then retroactively.
Yeah, and then retroactively. Yeah. So
I didn't know that.
So the first two Harry Potters could be argued that was part of the disease of over-publishing, because they didn't sell. Right. So we're in this kind of opposing universe. So therefore you go, well, we're publishing a debut literary novelist, or Christ, let's say short stories, and you're not going to make much money on it. You know that we only have a certain amount of slots every year to publish, and therefore is it worth 1/90th of our endeavours for the whole year? Because we have 90th or not? Clearly not. But at the same time, what happens next might well be. So that's part of an over-publishing problem. You go, we're going to play a long-term game with this.
Yeah, so, loyalty.
Yeah, and just the first book or first two books or first three books don't really sell of any, but the fourth one might be jackpot. Yeah.
Let's get to just in winding down. So we've covered the travelers and the sort of traditional sales, but you haven't really answered that question. You just said you got to be yourself and show up. That's I don't know. There's got to be more to it than that.
I think it's a mix. It's as you go up the levels. Certainly at the lower levels, it is about turning up.
Making the sales calls.
Making the sales when you give them a pack and off you go, and then. At the next level up, it is about pushing back into the process, and that's what a good salesperson does. Saying, if we package the book like this, or actually we position it like this, or I know that it's going to sell like that, then we need to. The salesperson's job within the publishing process is about representing the market, so that you're.
You mean getting customer feedback? You mean?
Yeah. And knowing it as well, because you can't talk to every customer each time you need to make a small decision in publishing. You have to kind of know it and be in touch with it. So therefore, you are alongside all those publishing decisions all the way. You might be ignored occasionally, and you go, you know what? If we put that jacket on there, Waterstones aren't going to buy it. Or
Waterstones says they're not going to buy it. They want that jacket. Yeah, they'll dictate to you.
Yes, but also but again, you can't ask Waterstones about every jacket, and you shouldn't. Eventually, the publisher has to make the decisions. Yes, of course if you want retailer buying, of course you go and talk to them, but you can't do that for every book, and you shouldn't, quite frankly.
But what's this got to do with being a good salesman? You're relying on your salespeople to get customer feedback that will affect how you sell the book.
Yeah, you're an intermediary from the market into the publishing, so that the publishing is fit for the market, it's fit for purpose.
Yeah. So that's again, we're getting to the definition of a good.
That's
you've been successful.
That's how you get ahead.
Because you've taken account of what the customer wants, and that's how you've marketed your book.
And you feed it into the publishing process, and whether that's on the marketing side or the sales material or the priorities. If you are publishing too many books, which we all do, the ability to prioritise is also extremely important. Yeah, we'll leave that's a medium-sized book. We'll do medium activity on that. This book is, you know what, I've got a hunch about this book. We're really going to kind of go for it.
So allocation of resources.
Yes, you're not playing managing director, but you are playing this is what I think the markets will do with these things, and therefore you're inputting into all the decisions kind of from top to bottom. I think there's a bit of the publishing process where you actually the salesperson has to leave. and then,
well, for example, the editorial side, obviously.
Yeah, no, I think there's a bit of sort of, it's when marketing and publicity, again, sales are always going to be more on the empirical side than the flamboyant side, but at the same time they desperately need the creativity that marketing and publicity can produce in order to go out to the customers going, I've got some magic here for you.
Yeah.
So in terms of a salesperson's career, be great at selling, know and be liked by the customers. Make sure you're the best call of the day.
In other words, they have the most fun with you.
Yeah, exactly. And you may not have the best stuff, but hopefully you do. Yeah, just be the call that they look forward to. That's the mantra at that level. And then the next level up, when you're more in the kind of in the office, is to inform the publishing, and that's probably why I did well. You're harnessing both. You understand the publishing process, you understand what people need from you, and also what they need from you and what you need from them, and being able to know that, articulate it, and then make it happen when you're not necessarily in charge, is part of representing the sales area, representing the function correctly into the publishing process. That's what happens when you're the UK sales director, and you're setting strategy, and you're the last place in terms of customer negotiations, or of course there's general management and allocation of resources and all that. But essentially, what you're doing is representing the market into the publishing, and that's really important.
Well, and the publishing firm has to believe that you understand the customer the best.
Yes.
You can't be arguing with people all the time about which way to go with the way the thing should look, for example.
Yeah.
You have to be acknowledged as the source of the best information.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a powerful place to be in a publishing company. Very. There's no one else in the publishing company who is placed to do that. No, everyone's got a view.
Yeah.
And particularly on an independent side where we tend to be not particularly hierarchical, it is quite discursive.
Yeah.
There are lots of people in our meetings who feel they've got a view about stuff, but eventually, it's the sales director who says the market's like this. You might want to ignore the market and say we're going to go for something fresh, and actually the market will follow us, and that happens, of course. But having someone really solid, giving you really good, if you do this, this happens. If you do that, that happens. That is really important. Mm-hmm. So
and having a good track record,
of course,
and
there are some rather basic things like being able to set a budget and hitting them, because that's where you start. The budgeting for the year starts at the top line.
Each product, if you want to call a book that, is unique.
Yes.
So that you get a say on almost every fashioning, every product that you then turn around and have to sell.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, spot on.
Okay, just then moving from that to going directly to the consumer. Is that a trend? Is that something that you're doing more of, or having to do more of with your website, or are you seeing an increase in sales going directly to the consumer?
We're a small trade publisher, and therefore with not a particularly big brand. I wish I was saying something different. Clearly, when there are poor relations with the retailers, then the desire to deal directly with the consumer becomes strong, and all our business is basically intermediated by bookshops or libraries or wholesalers or exporters or whoever. So therefore you get very poor data around who's buying your books. So therefore, intuition and experience and all that kind of stuff, in some ways is over-indexed in our business because we don't have proper data. So the bigger companies are desperately trying to get what they call big data. So the thrust is often not to sell books. I mean, all the bigger companies have direct-to-consumer websites, etc., but most of all, it's about reading habits, and it's not about selling. It's actually about finding out what consumers want and who they are. and then going out to them, then go out and where they actually buy their books from is not particularly bothered. Though there are smaller presses than us, maybe on the academic side, or very much more niche publishers who will have good direct to consumer. They'll have the names, and they'll have people who buy stuff from them every month.
Yeah.
But for a general trade publisher, that's really hard, because we're publishing, a range of novels, and it doesn't, our output of itself doesn't, hopefully it's all quality and it's all good, and we have strong reputation in certain areas, but it doesn't mean enough to say, oh, actually I'll have one person following our publishing, because it's too broad. But if you're a niche publisher, then either on the left wing or the right wing, or
remember
green, or
Golantz's left.
Well, the left book club. Absolutely, yeah. But what you are trying to do is develop a community around your authors. There are kind of brands and sub-brands within this, and you can argue the publishers up the top, but also, with the bigger properties, you are trying to draw people towards them, and certainly
because that sells more books, I guess, because they'll want to buy all their backlist as well.
Yeah.
And
also, readers they're not really bothered about what the publisher was. They have loyalty to the author.
Yeah.
So therefore, with our more successful authors, they're not all of them are great on social media, but they'll have some kind of community, and either they've developed that themselves, or they've developed that with us, or we've developed it for them. That's really important, but it needs to be a consistent offering. So if you're I know Robert Faber, who writes kind of Roman epics, you can do that, because number 6 will be the same kind of place as number 5, and it'll bring them on. So you can create those worlds, but it tends to be either for huge properties, big authors, or ongoing genre writers, and we do plenty of that. And
is that the future, though? I guess that's my final question, is how are you adapting to all of these changes, and how has the sales function, marketing function changed, and how will it change?
Some of the stuff is exactly the same as it's been for many, many years. Get as many books into the bookshop as possible so people can see it. Get as much traditional media that you possibly can. Being interviewed on the Today programme, is still a big deal. Having the lead review in the Sunday Times, all that shifts books, and that would have been the same in 1961 as it is in 2018. Those levers are still there. Now you can argue that there's less books, space for books and reviews and all that kind of stuff, but on the whole, that still works. That kind of analog process driven manufacturing, leading up to publication, getting advance copies out to people who are going to blurb it, all that stuff hasn't changed much. Mm-hmm. What has changed is e-books, and certainly Amazon means that you can sort of not play with rankings, but you can certainly do things with your metadata. You could go to Waterstones and go, this book's number 10 on Amazon, you haven't taken any, there's clearly a demand. So you can, you're always slightly manoeuvring around those bookshop chains, or saying, oh gosh, this is a success. But really, the kind of law of threes, as I call it, still exists. For someone to buy a book, they have to have 3 impulses to buy it. So let's say they hear something on the radio, they see an advert on the tube, and they see it in the bookshop. 1, 2, 3, off to the till, $9.99. Thanks very much. And so those things still exist. What has changed is, yes, you can build communities for your authors, or they can build it themselves, either through website or social media. Yes, people can have platforms, mainly on social media, but maybe other stuff as well, which you say, okay, there are 900,000 people who know you. I mean, we're publishing a book called History is the Unexpected. These guys have come from different environments. Sam Willis is now a TV presenter, pretty much. James Abel is more on the academic side, but they have a podcast which hundreds of thousands of people listen to. It means that publishers can now go to people like that, saying, okay, there's a platform. We know that there are 200,000 people who know about History of the Unexpected. Every week there's the people doing it, and so therefore that's, in some ways, if you like, the empiricism of it. When you get it right, a blogger or a vlogger, or someone who's extremely influential, probably to quite a small age group,
Well, look at Rupi Kaur, the poet.
Yeah, exactly.
On Instagram.
Exactly. And so in the early days of social media, it's just like, I think there was a feeling it didn't sell books, but it was going to be important, and I think that now has happened. But my God, it's not A, B, C, D. It really isn't. You can have someone who is well known, but the product that you've got, and just because someone's well known and well liked and guess what, it's probably funny and influential and intelligent, you've still got to produce a book that actually kind of encapsulates that, and then it's good for the people who like it. So it's not alchemy is the wrong thing, but it's an organism really that you have to sort of fashion. You have to fashion to get it in the right thing.
Yeah.
But that has changed. That is definitely something that has changed. You have got these places where the people are out there in the universe, and
more people are more popular.
Yes,
right now.
More people are more popular. That's also true.
And you can, as a publisher, you can proactively sort of seek out all these people,
exactly, in a way,
and then come up with ideas that they might and approach them. I guess.
And before then, it was just like editorial going, "This is a good book," and then you kind of broadcast as much as you can. You say to everyone, "This is a good book." Yeah. Now you can be much more filleted, much more directed, much more, and that's why the use of data and the ability to have data is so important to any creative industry. But and publishers are part of that, and that's why the bigger companies who have bigger reach and more consumers are hunting after this. But we're still in the early days of the science or maths of publishing. We really are. We're still thinking. Most books are still published because the editor thinks it's a good book.
Yeah.
Or at least it's similar enough to a book that author has sold before. That yes, there's a bit of a conveyor belt there, but essentially it's still that, because we don't really have the reading data. It's coming though. It is coming.
Yeah.
But even then, we're still at a point where most of the data we're getting is interesting rather than useful. Just because you know that most people stop reading on page 63. How does that help the next book that you're going to do? Is that just like, okay, well we'll make sure that the romantic hero appears on page 83 rather than 63? Well, you can't really. That only works in very confined areas.
Mm-hmm.
So we're on the cusp now, but it's social media and being able to talk to people is clearly something that's changed. But broadcast, i.e., just scattering it out there, it still works. Or when it works, you kind of know why it has done.
I guess chasing after these popular podcasters or bloggers and producing books with them may sell books, but I still think they're not necessarily good books. They might be just mediocre, and they appeal to people that these podcasters appeal to. And they're not. That's not a way of what really. I mean, what Jeffrey Faber talked about was. The whole idea, the whole reason behind this was to produce really good books, not just mediocre books.
I think you sort of have to do both. In that, my predecessor here said you publish books to make you money and you publish books to make you proud. And ideally, each book makes you proud and makes money.
Right.
I mean, he's right, but also I think it's about short, medium, and long term that you're doing some things for quite short term. Vampires are in, so therefore you publish a vampire book. It'll sell to a certain level, but because it's the fifth vampire book rather than the first one that broke, it's going to sell not very well. But and that's either pragmatic publishing or maybe a bit cynical or whatever. Or that thrillers sell, so therefore you've got some of your output is thrillers.
Yeah, you've got to cover your costs though.
Yeah, and I think entertaining people through reading is. You can't be too po-faced about it. I think you go, but in a publishing house like mine, if we did certain stuff which was popular, we just wouldn't be good at it. It's not in the spirit of the house, and it's not really why people work here. So there are certain things that you steer away from. So I think all of us are in publishing to try and add value into the world. So it's a cliche, but we're trying to make the world a slightly better place, or make it more understandable for others, which means that therefore people, either behave better or there's definitely a vocational element to that. And so therefore, yes, publishing, crossword puzzles or whatever, is a means to an end to a certain extent, but you still enjoy selling books, But in the end, there is a high-mindedness probably about publishing, but it's not all about publishing, Nobel Prize winners or there's a middle ground, if you like, of pragmatic, decent books that sell pretty well, which means that you can reach for the high ground as well, but not in a kind of indulgent way. Ideally, that book, Rome, by Matthew Neal, which is Waterstones' book of the month at the moment, that's a book that has made us money and made us feel proud. So they do exist, and you try and do that with every single book, but it's not necessarily always possible. But you are trying to, with every single book, you're trying to get humanity to understand itself just a wee bit better. So there is a high-mindedness, but sometimes you need to be on the lowlands for a bit too.
Anything else about the role of sales and marketing in the whole sort of world of the book that you?
I think, as I say, some of it is still very traditional. There are still travellers going around. There's still there are. I don't know how many people in the publishing industry in the UK got in their car this morning, drove 20 miles to a bookshop, and went through a whole catalogue of stuff. Probably 100 or maybe 200 over. So
that's all, right?
Probably in terms of the reps going round store by store. When there are all those chains, lots happened at head office level rather than at branch level, or in the independent sector was in retreat. But there's still that still kind of goes on. What I think has changed is that the retailers probably demand proof of concept now in a way that before they didn't really. If you pushed hard enough, you'd probably get somewhere. Set the reps big targets, give them what they feel they need, and go out and block out the light in bookshops. That push is not. You simply can't do that now. There's a level of caution happened in booksellers. Waterstones also kind of demand proof of concept, so you can't just go out with something that's untried and just go, we'll put out 10,000-15,000 into the market. So
how do you come up with that proof of concept?
Well, either your person who's got 2 million followers on Instagram, or you've got your platform. If you don't have that, then you have to build it. And that's not just about advertising in the bookseller. It's about creating a story, creating a real tangible sense that this is something that will happen, and it's real. And you can't do that for every book. So therefore, there is more. The pull is much more important than the push. Push is still important. You need books in bookshops. And the marketing. A lot of the marketing we do is still towards the trade, because if you think that almost all our books are sold through the trade, then getting the trade on side is still extremely important. When you start talking like that, it feels very retro, conservative, legacy business. But it's the fact that most of our income is mediated by 5 or 6 big places. So that hasn't changed, but the attitude to what is coming out. Attitude from retailers to publishers, and their attitude to us is like, give us something we can chew on, rather than don't ask us to make a punt. So therefore, everything has to be more careful. Everything has to mean more. Give us the tools to give the customer a better sales pitch. Why am I going to sell this book rather than that one? In some ways, that's always happened, but you have to build something more than the dream for each book these days, and that's why. A big social media presence is attractive to a publisher, but at the same time, the book itself has to be consistent. It's not all about that. You can make things happen not without social media, but you have to be pretty convincing about that. And I think that's the main, in broad brush terms, that's the thing that's changed. Before, you could probably do a good job on the trade, and then you'd get some publicity and marketing around the back, if you see what I mean. But now it has to be all of a piece, I guess, and that which means the sales and marketing have to talk to each other even more, even though it's quite a similar piece, and also, but you have to be really clear about why the consumer would buy it in a way that you didn't necessarily have to be so articulate about it 10 years ago, and that goes back to having good data about the consumer, And again, sometimes we have to fake it, and sometimes we have to kind of buy the information in, or that marketing-y bit has to be convincing and not just fluff. Well,
thanks for not talking fluff to me today.
I'm not sure if I answered the question. Anyway, any of the questions?
The objective of this podcast is to understand as best we can the book, everything to do with the book. And this has been enlightening. And thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure. It's lovely to talk to you.
I've been speaking with Will Atkinson, who is the Managing Director of Atlantic Books UK, in his office in Bloomsbury, London, England. Thanks again.